hidden in plain sight.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Season 4 of Hidden in Plain Sight, the series that dares to ask, what if Christopher Marlowe did not die in Deptford in 1593? I'm Dr. Julian, your host for the series, and with me is my regular co-host, Carol Paxton. Hi again, Carol.
Hello again, Julian.
Wow, we've reached the 7th episode of our co-hosted presentation of the conversation between Professor Joseph Khoury, the chairperson of the Department of English at St. Francis Xavier University at Antigonish, Nova Scotia, with our friend and author of Marlowe's Complaint, Dr. Peter Hodges. Together they are taking another look at the rival poet's sonnets, the numbers 78 to 86 in the collection titled Shakespeare's Sonnets, to see if they can decipher who the actual rival poet is. Meanwhile, we are providing the commentary on this unique event. In our last episode, Carol, Peter completed his presentation of his evidence with an investigation of Sonnet 81, which he feels identifies Marlowe as the author of the entire rival poet sequence. Where do we go from here, Carol?
Well, I think the discussion's about to enter a new phase. Peter has said he wants to review the case and make a summation of his arguments, closing argument, I suppose you could call it, if we want to think of it as a court case, although that's a bit adversarial. And I hope that Professor Khoury is going to do much the same and sum up his case. I don't actually know what's going to happen, but that I think would be a good way to tie things up.
So, as I said in the last episode, this is sort of taking on the shape of a courtroom drama with you, our listeners, as the court of public opinion.
All right.
Well, let's see how this goes, shall we?
Let's assume, in a sense, that you and I are now in the jury room, jury of two, and it's our charge to review the evidence to determine the facts. And so, what I think, to cut the process, to the chase, we should take each piece of evidence and decide whether or not we can consider them factual in any sense of the word. And if we have questions about the facts, of whether or not they are facts, we have to put it aside and we'll discuss it later. And it may end up that we don't find a resolution to this case and it's a hung jury, but that'll be what it'll be.
Yeah. Okay.
So now I think, and I'm just taking my impression of what you've said to me, but I think you have essentially agreed that Chapman is the leading candidate for the rival poet. And you may even have made some admissions that based on Sonnet 86, one would conclude that he was the rival poet that's being spoken of. But I wanted to go back through the evidence that I presented as the prosecutor, because I only use Sonnet 86 one time. And I have 4 other pieces of evidence that I want to talk about. So the first one was, and it's from Sonnet, it's from Sonnet 78, and it says, "In others' works, thou dost but mend the style." And from that, I concluded that the addressee, being the patron, is a person who has more than one protege or supports more than one individual poet. That was my conclusion based on "in others' works." you do but mend the style. But for me comment is sort of put aside because we're really only looking to establish, does this patron support more than one? Because if we can do that, we can eliminate certain people from the list of suspects, as it were, because there are some people who are suspect who have a patron that only ever supported them and never supported anyone else. So do you agree with me that that statement indicates that relationship between the patron and the author of that sonnet?
That he was the only patron?
No, that he was a patron who supported more than one,
Okay.
and that this particular poet is one of those many. We don't know how many, but more than one. And that's all we're trying to say, that he or she is one poet supported by this patron who supports other poets.
Well, that's possible. Certainly it's possible.
Well, do we rule out anything from this? Can we say, I mean, if you can't just say possible now, you're a finder of fact. You have to look at this.
Yeah,
And,
but I like, I mean, patronage is such a, you know, interesting field of study. I certainly am not an expert on patronage, that's for sure. But I mean, it's not uncommon for them to have, patronized, more than one. That, but can we confirm this? I mean, it's a possibility, sure. I really don't know too much about patronage, beyond the basics, but it is possible to say I've had, that this is more than one, this patron had more than one poet that he patronized. I mean, now, but let's assume that that's the case, though. I mean, let's assume that that's the case for a second. Um, you know, it's sort of like saying, Jesus had only one disciple. Well, no, he had 12. He had one that supposedly he loved, we're told, and I think in the Gospel of John, if I'm not mistaken. Can we then say that he didn't love the other disciples? I'm not so sure we can,
seriously, the man is saying, in others,
Yeah.
you amend the style. But for me, you are my inspiration.
Well,
Now,
that's fine, but what does that have to do with patronage then? I mean, you asked me about a patronage, and
no,
and
I'm asking you about the statement.
yeah,
I'm asking you is on the basis of this statement, where the individual says, in effect, there is more than one person vying for your patronage.
yeah,
Within this statement, that's what he is asserting.
okay.
Can we from this eliminate those people who have not attempted to ask for support from this patron?
Can we eliminate people who have not asked?
Yes. Or received. Are you?
I guess my answer is, that assumes that we know that the writer of the verse is telling the truth exactly.
I'm assuming a priori that everything he says is a true statement.
Yeah,
I have to take the witness at his word unless I find something contradictory. Now, you, as the defense,
yeah,
might wish to call into question all of his statements. However,
sure.
there have been other matters, circumstantial evidence presented, as well as documentary evidence presented in support of the witness's statements. Now, in the case of this, I did not actually assemble all the pages, but I did provide a list of the suspects,
Yeah,
and I provided a list of their patrons. And I provided a list where there were patrons who patronized more than one of those poets. They were all on a list, and some of those patrons, such as Earl of Essex, was said to have supported 5 of the 6.
Mhm.
5 of the 17 that I presented. Out of the 17, there were 4 who only claimed one patron, and that patron patronized no one else that we know of. And
Okay.
that was documentary evidence that I submitted to you.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, we have documentary evidence then supporting my interpretation of this as a fact that there are among the suspects several who only ever had one patron, and that patron never patronized anyone else. And that was primarily because they were local people that they knew personally, not
Right.
because they were lords or something like that.
Okay.
Now, that's the statement. Can you accept that factually?
Sure, I'll accept that.
Did I just wear you down, or are you putting up with me now?
Well, again, my my concern is that you're taking the words literally in this case, that there are that this is the that's fine.
I insist on taking
Yeah.
them literally.
Okay.
We've done one. We've got
Okay,
one.
we've done one.
Whoa. Number two
Okay.
was the nautical reference.
Okay.
The proud full sail of his great verse, and that is found in Sonnet 86.
Yeah.
Now, the question arises, what is the meaning of this? Well, of course, he's calling it the proud full sail of his great verse. So the author is associating verse with sailing. Do you accept that that's a fair interpretation?
Well, I mean, it's a great sailing metaphor, yes. I mean, so
Okay,
it is about sailing, and it's a metaphor, yes.
now, having established that, we should then look for a poet
Mhm.
who has actually written something that could be compared to proud full sails.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that George Chapman has done exactly that when he translated the Iliad, and also when he wrote his poem to Guyana in praise of Sir Francis Drake.
Right.
So we have these 2 concrete examples. Not to say that there aren't other examples, but we do know that George Chapman satisfies that part of the description.
Mm-hmm.
Do you accept that?
Yeah, and as I repeat that, it's not unknown that one of the supposed references to poets is George Chapman in Sonnet 86.
Okay. Yeah, you don't want to necessarily fall back on other people's estimation. This is
I'm not. I don't
you're
think
the
it's
juror
conclusive.
here.
I don't think it's conclusive. I think I mentioned early on in our discussion of that sonnet that one of the supposed poets is Christopher Marlowe
Yes.
in that
Well,
poem.
and
Now,
I'm not trying to get to the end of
no,
it.
I understand that. I'm simply saying I don't dispute the possibility of Chapman. I think it's a reasonable possibility. What I also said from our discussion back then is that references to sailing and ships and what have you in the ocean were quite prominent at that time, right? So it's again, it's not what you're saying in that respect is not radical.
I'm not trying to be radical about it. What I'm trying to do is get us to answer the question: does George Chapman satisfy this description?
Yeah, it's certainly a strong possibility. Yes.
It's one thing that I could say about George Chapman that you would not find it necessary to refute.
No, it's a strong possibility.
I'm not trying to say it identifies him. I'm
Okay.
just trying to say it does not exclude him, because out of my list of suspects, I can exclude several of them.
Sure.
Because
Okay.
they didn't write anything having to do with proud full sails.
All right.
Right? So again, We're working backwards here. I'm not trying to,
Right.
this is where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to find out where did they go. And but I can only do that by eliminating certain places on the map,
Okay.
right? I know 5 of them never went to Venice because
Sure.
I have their full itineraries and I know they never went to Venice, something like that.
Okay.
So we've eliminated, so we're eliminating
Okay.
possibilities.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
trying to shore up one or another. I'm just trying to eliminate, and this is a factual reference that includes this individual among others.
Sure.
Okay. So now we turn to number 3, which is the one about the hymns.
Okay.
Uh, where is that? That's in Sonnet 85. And he says, I think good thoughts while others write good words, and like unlettered clerk, still cry amen to every hymn that able spirit affords. So we could say to ourselves, we should be looking for a poet who has written a song or a canto or possibly a hymn. And it turns out that we can find at least 2 poets among our suspects, Spencer and Chapman, both of whom published poems that they titled hymns. So this much we can say: 1, that's a description, and 2, it does not eliminate Chapman from the list of candidates.
Yeah. So hymn is of course not necessarily only a religious poem, but a poem of praise, right?
So we're saying he writes a hymn.
Yeah, a good, as opposed to the unlettered clerk, right?
Is there anything that you're getting at here that is undermining the notion that the person he's talking about has written a hymn?
I think he's not referring to that poet who wrote a hymn, though.
To every hymn that able spirit affords in polished form of well-refined pen.
Yeah, well, again, he's making a reference to the to the unlettered
I, like unlettered
utilization.
clerk,
Yeah.
cry amen to every hymn that able spirit affords in polished form of well-refined pen.
Okay.
So I'm crying amen to every hymn he's written. I,
Right.
unlettered clerk, don't know how to write a hymn, but I
Yeah.
know he wrote one, and I'll cry amen.
Okay.
Okay, so now we have a description, and it is a fact that Chapman wrote this kind of verse.
Okay.
That's okay. So we've got 3 facts established.
Okay.
And I mean, that's good work. And we're not taking other people's word for it. You understand? We're doing this on our own. We're in the jury room by ourselves, hashing this out, taking the evidence. I'm not reading somebody else's graduate paper or making reference to somebody who wrote something in the 19th century. I'm confronted with the actual real evidence, doing the hard work, the labor of having to find out, does this statement correspond to any actual physical document? Well, in fact, it does. So I can now trust the witness that much more, because when he says something, there's a document to support it.
Okay.
Right? He ain't lying to me yet.
Okay. All right. We'll proceed on that assumption.
Okay, so we got 3. Now, this is good. So now we come to the real tough one. And this is the one about the alien pen.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I would fully anticipate your metaphorical spidey sense is going to go up. However, I'm going to counter that with a straightforward, literal, What do these words tell me? Interpretation, and can I find documents that support this wild assertion that every alien pen hath got his use? And I have done exactly that, as you know.
Okay. Right.
And so whatever metaphorical potential exists inside. Oh, I see you.
Oh, yes.
You snuck him in.
I'm adjusting the
I
camera.
missed that. I missed.
I'm adjusting the camera, but yeah, this is how this is what I wear sometimes to my Shakespeare
Devil,
students'
you
exam.
devil.
You know.
Just as we hit the biggest, toughest issue. Where's my Marlowe T-shirt?
I have three Shakespeare shirts. I have to get a Marlowe shirt though.
So what we discovered in our exegesis over the previous 6 weeks is that Hero and Leander is the poem that was appropriated by George Chapman, to which he attached his name and his verse.
Sure.
And to the degree that there is any literal interpretation of every alien pen hath got my use, and under thee his poetry disperse,
Yeah.
that's a pretty much a one-to-one match. It's very, very difficult to find anything in the physical world that matches so squarely with those words on the page.
What I'm finding difficult is aligning that with Sonnet 78. Because Sonnet 78, yes, it does talk about basically people using, invoking thee for my muse and so on and so forth, and alien pen had got my use, but you're suggesting that this refers exactly to the completion of Hero and Leander. I'm saying that is not necessarily the case, that this Sonnet 78 is more general as opposed to speaking to a particular poem. I don't see what evidence would tie it to that particular poem, especially the completion of the poem. That's the part that I've always found difficult in your argument.
I think that's a fair question. Does this particular statement specify that particular poem, Hero and Leander, and Chapman's completion? And the response that I have to make to that is I don't have any other examples of anything like this to compare it to. Let me remind you, I'm not trying to identify Hero and Leander.
Okay.
In this instance, right this moment in this sequence, I'm trying to establish who's the rival. And this bit of evidence, this witness statement, this eyewitness statement, who's never lied to me so far, has made this assertion about his rival and what his rival has done.
Okay.
And what we have is that this statement is consistent with what happened with Hero and Leander. Now, that is simply one example of something that is consistent with the statement made in Sonnet 78. If I could find another example that was consistent, I'll accept it. But we haven't discovered it. And you can go in all sorts of directions if you want to. I want to pick up on one or two things that you've said, such as the business of writers emulating and then attempting to better each other.
Yeah.
And that's just the zeitgeist. We're not talking, that's not evidence necessarily. That's
no, but I mean that's what Chapman did, right? I mean, he was trying to show off by using Marlowe's poem to say, I'm as good as Marlowe, at least, and here's my proof that I'm finished.
And one could accept that, and one could accept that if he had published his poem independently.
Well, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe this, I mean, Marlowe was, I mean, his poem was popular, so.
The point is that if George Chapman simply wanted to show his personal skill using Christopher Marlowe as a foundation,
Yeah.
he could have published his poem without any reference to Christopher Marlowe. He could have said, I read Christopher Marlowe's poem and I thought it was great, and here's my answer to it, published it in a separate volume, George
Okay.
Chapman, and never put Christopher Marlowe's name on it. But that's not what he did.
No, he didn't. No.
That's not what he did.
Yeah.
He took Marlowe's poem and used it to sell his poem.
Sure.
That's why we have this whole argument. But even with that, I'm still not trying to prove any of those things right now.
Okay.
The only thing I'm trying to do is, does the description, is it matched by the cover page of Hero and Leander, begun by Christopher Marlowe and completed by George Chapman? Does that match up with every alien pen hath got my use? Is that a fact?
Well, it certainly, one could argue that it's certain that what Chapman did is an example of this. Sure.
Sure. That's all I'm asking.
That's all I would say. I wouldn't say that it's a direct reference.
I wouldn't go any further than that, because again,
Okay.
I'm only trying to establish who my rival is, and does he match all of the descriptions that are made about the rival by this eyewitness. The
Okay.
eyewitness at this point is not talking about any of the other context. He's not dissecting this in any other way. He's simply saying, and in another thing, he did this.
Okay.
Okay, so
All right.
so we have 4 facts.
Okay.
We have 4 facts.
Hmm.
And we come to the 5th fact, which is a continuation of this same discussion, because it says, under thee, his poesy disperse.
Okay.
Now, the question then becomes, okay, can we find an example where a poet using the name of another, being the guy writing the poem, being the guy who's making the eyewitness, where the name of another, being the eyewitness, who we have not identified, has gotten assistance from a mutual friend in order to publish his poetry using the witness's name and the friend's name? Can we find an example where that has occurred? And we do, and it happens to be the Hero and Leander that George Chapman published. And because of the physical properties of that specific publication, we can actually show that the person to whom Chapman dedicated his portion of the poem appeared immediately above Chapman's additions.
Okay.
Immediately in the full publication, which included Marlowe above that and included a dedication to Thomas Walsingham above that. So under thee actually has, when you argue about is it metaphorical or is it literal, it actually has a very, very literal physical reality. This was published under thee, if I can assume at Lady Walsingham at this point was thee. For the
Okay,
purpose
so-
of,
Yeah, no, sorry. So you're saying that this again, you're arguing that whereas in the previous argument you said it may not be a direct reference to Chapman, now you're saying it is a direct reference to Chapman?
nope. I'm only saying this is an example of an instance when the description given by the eyewitness is matched. I'm only saying, I'm not saying, when I'm done with this, I'm going to identify Chapman. But before this, I haven't identified Chapman. What I'm saying is that when you tell me what he did was he published his poetry using my name and
Yeah.
you helped him, and you being a person's unknown
Okay.
and my name being person unknown, but by not even filling in the blanks, just saying I have person A and person B who match up with person unknown 1 and person unknown 2, the patron, and Chapman slotted in there. And I have an example of a published artifact that actually does that very same thing as described by the eyewitness, who uses no names but gives me every other thing I need to know what I'm looking at. That's what that is.
Okay. You're basically saying that this argument, moves you further towards your conclusion of the previous argument, that this is reference to Chapman.
What I'm saying is that these 5 pieces of evidence eliminate all other possible suspects.
Right.
That there is no other suspect who can individually be matched to each and every one of these eyewitness statements.
Okay.
And verified with documentary evidence showing that the actions that the individual making the complaint has described have actually occurred, and
Right.
that the person who caused them to occur, now we know, had to be George Chapman, because there's nobody left.
Okay. All right.
You've
In
agreed
principle.
that it's George Chapman.
Well, again, I do think that he's a good contender. There's no doubt.
No, he's not a contender. A contender would be one among 3 or 4. A contender would be somebody in the semifinals of the NBA. That's not a contender.
Okay, so
This is a
he's the most likely.
He's not the most likely. He's the winner. There's nobody
Okay.
else. There's nobody else in the room. He's beaten them all.
Okay.
They're all done. They've all tried. They've all made their cases, but the eyewitness did not identify them, because the eyewitness gave us 5 specific
Right.
things.
Okay.
Now, there could be a 6th thing that George Chapman doesn't match, but at this point,
Okay.
17 suspects rounded up by the Stratford PD, or the constabulary of Kent, and put in a lineup and matched up against the statements of the eyewitness, who's hiding behind a single-faced mirror, right, a see-through mirror, and he's pointing to that guy, and they're saying, how do you know it's that guy? And as these 5 things, you check it out, you'll see it's true. They checked it out. They ran down all the evidence that matched the person he's telling you it is, and they let everybody else go.
Right.
And now they have one guy. Lock him up. Hold him for questioning.
All right.
That's what we're doing now.
So Chapman is the rival poet identified.
Chapman is being held for questioning.
Okay. All right. He's a
I'm
prime
not done with
suspect.
He's my suspect.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
You know what, Carol? That did sound a little like Professor Khoury almost had to agree with Peter about Chapman being the actual rival poet. I don't think he liked the idea, and he certainly looked uncomfortable with it, because Peter really put him on the spot. Well, maybe it wasn't altogether fair, but I think for a moment there he reluctantly agreed. Okay, let me ask you this question, Carol. Have you ever been a juror?
No, I got called for a jury panel once, but I never got selected. I think they took one look at me and sort of thought argumentative.
Well, you've seen the film 12 Angry Men, haven't you?
Everyone has, yes. I was just going to say that, yes. We don't need to talk about real jury. We can reference that.
So the business of going through the evidence is not unusual. We know that. And in this process, sometimes people stick on points that are even side issues, until they can bring themselves to discuss some of the main pieces of evidence. Do you think that's sort of how this whole series has played out?
Yes, in some ways. And I think as well, going back to just how humans behave, um, if we believe in something, then we are inclined to defend it. And we are inclined to defend it even in the teeth of the evidence. Um, but also anybody who looks at the evidence that we have been presenting can surely see that once you concede that the rival poet, the poet of these sonnets, the addressee of these sonnets, if you like, is George Chapman, then to be honest, there is very little going back. You have, like Wile E. Coyote, run off the edge of the cliff, and it doesn't matter how much you scramble, you are going to fall down to the bottom of the canyon. And I think I don't want to say this because it sounds quite rude, but once you concede George Chapman, you've basically conceded everything else. And I think it's pretty obvious to see that somebody who does not like where that leads is going to tend to go off on tangents.
Well, we want to be fair and not try to characterize people's motivations. But I think it's also perfectly fair to say that people who see things a particular way tend to defend that position very, very, very staunchly. And that's not unusual at all in human discourse.
Oh no, and I would say that anybody who has the least modicum of self-awareness realizes that that's what they do. I do it. Everybody does it. It's it it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that you can in many ways avoid. It's simply something to be aware of, I think, is the key.
So the question then is, when we're looking at the evidence for Chapman, Peter says, ignore all the experts, even the ones who say that the rival might be Chapman. Just look at the evidence. Either you make the choice based on the evidence, or you refuse because the evidence does not give you that result. Never mind what all the scholars in the world have said. They're not the people who are in the jury room today. Only we are in the jury room today, and only we have been given the power to judge the facts. So that's the judge's charge to the jury. Ignore all outside remarks. Nobody who was not on the witness stand has anything to say about any of this. The only people who have anything to say is the jury and the evidence, because the juries are finders of fact. And only those things that they consider facts can be used as evidence. And if they don't consider something as a fact, then they put it aside. So, in your mind then, Carol, has Peter done that today to your satisfaction as a person who is also in the jury room?
Yes. The only caveat I would make is that you can argue, I don't agree with this argument, but I do think it has some merit, is that none of it relates to reality at all. And I really do think you have to take that fairly extreme approach that this is an entirely fictitious story. And that really, I think, is the only way you can refute it by saying it's all made up, it's a fiction. Therefore,
Well,
identifying a real person is a fool's errand because it's a story. And that is a point of view that people have taken, but It's not exactly the majority opinion because, as I think we discussed in an earlier episode, Hunt the Rival Poet has been something that literary scholars and amateurs have been doing for the past century and a half. So obviously, most people who read those poems do think there is a reality behind them.
Well, I guess the question would be at that point, is this an issue of reasonable doubt? If a defense attorney were to argue that all of the evidence that has been presented represents a fictional universe, the prosecution would get to return and address that question. And the prosecution would have the opportunity to point out, fiction or not, this has an unusual reliance on real things. And that the person who perpetrated the fiction could not have been a person who simultaneously created a fictional hero and Leander, or who simultaneously created a fictional version of the Iliad translated by George Chapman. I mean, that would be a superhuman task, to create not only the fictional world of the sonnets, but create fictional documents that supported all of the fictional statements that are made in the sonnets themselves all those years ago. Because not all of these documents were retrieved at the same place and time that the sonnets were. I mean, they appeared in publications, in some cases 10 years before the sonnets were even published. Let's see, the Iliad was published in 1598. The sonnets were not published until 1609. So we're saying that this fiction took 10 years to produce.
Quite. And it doesn't really seem remotely credible that anybody would, for the sake of 9 poems of 14 lines, go to such a tremendous effort to fake documents, to try and create a reality that corresponds to a fiction to make you believe that the fiction was a reality. I'm starting to think of films like The Matrix and other such things, which, although highly entertaining, are genuinely are fictions. It is, yes, it is possible to create fake documents. Yes, it is possible to create false identities. These things do happen. But for the sake of 126 lines of poetry, it just, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
Well, before anyone concludes that we are bonkers, we should probably conclude the episode. Once again, thank you very much to Professor Khoury for joining us on this investigation of the rival poet's sonnets. Not only did he provide us with some unique insights into the scholarly world of the sonnets, but he has also been wonderfully generous and patient in taking the time to consider our own unorthodox point of view. I could only wish that more scholars of the works of Shakespeare, Marlowe, and the Elizabethan era would do the same. Meanwhile, what do you think out there in our audience? Be sure to write in and let us know, because you are the real jury. Speaking for Peter, Professor Khoury, Carol, and myself, thank you for listening, and we will look forward to seeing you next time on Hidden in Plain Sight.
Hidden in plain sight.